Welcome back, everyone. Apologize for the brevity of the lunch time. We know that our time together has been more brief this year. My name is Travis Bear. I'm a licensed therapist and co-chairman with Benet for this faith leader work group. And we're so excited to see those of you who are here, and so grateful for those of you who've been able to join us virtually. We respect your time, and we know it's a sacrifice to carve out some of your time in the day to be with us, and especially grateful for those who are participating. Benet and I are always excited when it comes together, and we've been very excited for today's presentations, and especially want to thank Pastor Vanetta for a beautiful opening prayer. Thank you again. And I love the comment that we live in community and in covenant. That's beautiful. And so we do have a community and covenant relationship with each other and helping each other with our pains and struggles. Also want to especially thank as well, Ali Crandall, Dr. Crandall, thank you so much again. A powerful message. You know, as a therapist for years, I've been following the ACEs research. It's been out there for years. And so I've been so excited about the message of the PCEs. And I cut my teeth as a therapist on working with child abuse, victims of abuse, children and families who've been affected by abuse. And so I'm so thrilled with this message because it gives us something we can do in the community and in our congregations and synagogues. So grateful for the research that's being done. Thank you again. And very excited for our afternoon portion of today's summit. Let's begin with dear friend, Rabbi Zippel. He'll offer a prayer to begin. And he's from the synagogue of Chabad, what is it? Chabad Lubavitch. Is it? I say that right? Close. Thank you. 85%. I'll take it. It's a passing grade. So we'll turn the time over to him. And then following his prayer, then we'll turn the time over to Heidi Dutson, who will lead our panel of those with lived experience. And I have to say how excited I am for this particular panel because it really brings into focus what Dr. Crandall talked about, connecting the intersection of those that come from experiences of some of the most deepest pain imaginable, and yet to find healing and so listen to their resilience and the strength that they'll share from their own personal experiences. And I'll let Heidi introduce the panel too. So, Rabbi.
Thank you, Travis. Almighty God, this Faith Leaders Summit for Suicide Prevention takes place during the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, the 8-day festival during which the Jewish people perform the ritual taking of the four kinds, as delineated in Leviticus chapter 23, and you shall take for yourself a citron fruit, fronds of date palms, branches of myrtles, and brook willows. Our mystics explain the profound significance that lies in the taking of these specific species. Each of these four represents a category of the vegetative kingdom. The citron being a fruit that has both a powerful scent and a unique taste, the palm fronds having a strong taste but no scent, the myrtle branches having a distinct smell yet no taste, and the brook willows lacking both scent and taste altogether. Although the citron, the etrog, has so much more going for it than any of the other species, certainly more so than the willow, it is your decree, O God, that the mitzvah, the observance, is not complete unless all four species are taken together as one, signifying the powerful theme that notwithstanding what may appear on the surface, each and every one of us has so much to bring to the totality of humanity. And it is only by each of us recognizing the unique gifts that we each contribute to society that the colorful tapestry of our world reaches its fullest potential. O loving and merciful Father, it is specifically for this purpose that we have all gathered together this day. So many of us have the unique privilege to care for your flock, and amongst those entrusted into our care are your children that struggle deeply and profoundly to recognize the unique role they have been given to play in your universe. We pray your blessing that our minds and hearts be open and receptive to the messages being shared here today, and that we may be able to internalize these important messages and carry them back to those that need them most, and inspire each and every one of our congregants to recognize and proudly discharge the unique and special responsibility you have entrusted them to make this world a godly abode. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thanks to all of you. Please feel free to continue eating your lunch if you're doing so. I'm super excited for this opportunity to moderate this panel. And I want to also just pause and take a moment to appreciate this environment that we find ourselves in. I've been able to serve on the committee for this summit for a few years now. And, you know, we often say in the work group that it's out of all the meetings we go to in a month, that is one of our favorites. And I think that same feeling that creates that reason is magnified here today, as we have so many from so many different faiths coming together for a very united and similar purpose: to create cultures of hope and healing in our relationships, to build those positive experiences, and to create cultures in our congregations that promote help seeking and hope finding. So I honor each of you that are making this a priority today, whether you're here in person or online. We have a wonderful panel here today. We've heard some great insights on ACEs and how to counter those and how to buffer against those through positive experiences that we can have some effect on. Our intention with this panel is to do a little bit of a deeper dive into that. You're going to hear from these panelists, these courageous panelists who we're so grateful for. They're going to share a little bit about their personal trauma. And as you're listening to them, we would love for you to do so with the intention of, how can I act in a way with somebody that's having a similar experience to be that positive difference? What kinds of things can I say that will help? And even consider, what kinds of things might I say that would hurt or make it worse? So that's our intention as we go. I want to give just a little bit of insight and introduction to all four of our panelists. We'll start here with Rabbi Zippel, that gave us our wonderful prayer. Rabbi was born in Toronto, Canada, and moved to Salt Lake City with his parents in July of 1992. He attended a Jewish high school in Chicago and attended Rabbinical College in London, England. He participated in Jewish outreach and humanitarian missions in multiple locations across Europe and the United States. He was ordained at the Rabbinical College in December 2013. He married Shana, is that how you say her name? In January of 2014, and together they moved to Utah later that year, and they've created the Young Jewish Professionals of Utah together. They are the proud parents of two adorable little boys. In February of 2019, Remy publicly came forward about the decade of sexual abuse he had endured at the hands of his childhood caretaker. He is believed to be the first Orthodox rabbi to publicly speak out about sexual abuse in his past. Since then, he has taken on a leadership role in combating sexual abuse in religious communities around the world and advocating for survivors. He serves his community as the crime victim representative on the Utah Council for Victims of Crime, a legislative appointed committee. His story has been shared in numerous formats, most recently in Darkness to Light, a made-for-TV special that aired on Lifetime in September of this year. He is a sought-after lecturer and mentor to communities around the world. Let's go ahead and welcome Rabbi here. Next, we have Lark Dean Galley, thank you. Lark, in March of 2019, she experienced a devastating loss, the unexpected suicide of her 19-year-old son. Having already endured her father's suicide 5 years earlier, this second death hit especially hard. Lark shares how this decision to use her loss to bless the lives of others helped her to heal from both her sons and her father's deaths by suicide. And again, to speaking on suicide prevention, she's the author of Learning to Breathe Again, Choosing to Heal After Losing a Loved One to Suicide. It's Lark's desire to instill hope in those who wonder how or even if they can go on. Let's welcome Lark. Next is Shayla Slaymaker. In 2013, Shayla lost her 14-year-old brother, Chance, to suicide. 3 years later, she also lost her older brother, Travis, to suicide. Since their losses, Shayla strives to be an advocate for suicide prevention and normalizing conversations around mental health. She has personally experienced depression, anxiety, and PTSD, and hopes that by being open about her and her family's struggles, she can help others to seek help and know that they are not alone. Welcome, Shayla. And last but certainly not least, we're so happy to have Deandra Brown. You might recognize Deandra as one of the 5 Browns. She's a concert pianist and recording artist with the 5 Browns, which is a piano ensemble group of her brothers and sisters, all trained at the Juilliard School. What brings her to today's discussion is her personal perspective of working through the aftermath of childhood sexual abuse and finding herself in the healing process. Deandra is passionate about victims' issues, especially as they pertain to protecting children. Deandra also works on projects with the Children's Justice Center program housed in the Utah Attorney General's office. Welcome. Hey, as we start our discussion off, we want to give each of our panelists just an opportunity to share a little bit more about their experience. This is a deeper dive into their life with their ACEs. And again, we hope that you'll keep an open mind and open heart to what some of these experiences are, what the impact has been, and how we can react in protective and proactive ways to help those that we know and love that are suffering similarly. So with that, we'll turn the time to you, Rabbi, and just go down through the line.
Well, thank you very much, Heidi. Thank you all. It's an honor to be on stage with these very, very brave women, and thank you all for taking the time to be here this afternoon. As Heidi said, I have a slightly interesting backstory. I was sexually abused as a child from age 8 to age 18. Which is kind of the proximity that I have to ACEs in my personal life. And I think whenever I talk about that, especially in a setting focused on an issue like this, I always find it mildly ironic to talk about that in the past tense. You know, this was something which happened in my life. It did happen a significant amount of years ago at this point. But I think that for me, whenever discussing the effects of ACEs and working through that as you grow up, it's so pertinent for me to realize personally and to share a message of how present these realities are. I hope Deandra will forgive me. We joked a couple months ago when we were approached about being on this panel, you know, that we were both asked to do this. You know, we're the ones who have kicked child sexual abuse. You know, we no longer struggle with it. It's a long time ago. It's in our past and we never have to worry about it again. But, you know, one of the very, very interesting conversations that I had actually with a faith leader, after my story went public, you know, he had a number of questions about it. And I'll never forget, he asked me, like, you know, his follow-up question almost in passing was, so when were you healed? You know, when did you no longer suffer the symptoms of, you know, of the experiences that you went through as a child? You know, when did you stop taking the medication? When did you kick cancer, as it were? You know, we all have these images of cancer patients walking down those wards and ringing the bells. I'm not sure if you've seen that in different videos, you know, different people who struggle with illnesses when they kind of go through their last treatment, take their last round of chemo, whatever it is, you know, they'll ceremonially ring a bell or do something of the sort. And the connotation of the question was a similar one, you know, when did you stop struggling with your adverse childhood experiences? And I very politely and delicately shared with him that it doesn't quite work like that. You know, this is a perpetual struggle. This is something which I will be dealing with for the rest of my life. And I think the sooner that I got around to realizing that and the long-term effects that it had, the better off that I was. I remember the conversation that I had with my mental health professional where we kind of got down to the reality that I, was diagnosed with PTSD. It was a couple traumatic events that leave a post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's a lifetime journey. And I've seen some of the materials that are available outside. There's always such vital information to take home from these sorts of events. I'm actually going to make a very, very interesting plug. You may not have expected to hear this from the rabbi on stage, but if there's one thing that you can do to really educate yourself on the realities of suicide as it pertains to ACEs, I would encourage you to watch something that's on Netflix. Like I said, a little surprising, I know, but on Netflix, there is an incredible, incredible documentary, I guess you'd call it, called The Story of Audrey and Daisy. For those of you who may be aware of it, Audrey and Daisy are two young women who lived on opposite sides of the country, who were both the victims of sexual violence in the early 2010s. I believe it was 2011, 2012. And this is a film that came out in 2016. And it contrasts their two experiences. They were sexually assaulted. There were pictures put up online. They were cyberbullied. And Audrey Potts took her own life 8 days after her assault. She couldn't, take everything that had happened as a result of that. And the other young woman, Daisy Coleman, obviously went through a very traumatic set of experiences herself and started a foundation and really used these experiences to move her life forward, which is the kind of the narrative of this remarkable piece on Netflix. What a lot of you may not know, and I apologize for being the spoiler, but I think it's crucial to really understand this, Daisy Coleman died by suicide last year. So after they had put out a Netflix film about how she had moved on and shown all this, incredible courage, and she had started a foundation, on and on and on, and all these things are true. And what Daisy had done in the aftermath of her assault, everything right, everything we look to in survivors to really display that courage, she had just gone through the list A to Z. She still struggled. And eventually she ended up dying by suicide last year. And so for me, I remember when Daisy passed, it was such a profound wake-up call that the issues that people who go through ACE struggle with, we can look great, we can feel great, they could put us up here on stage, it's exactly, and it's a compliment, and we appreciate that. That does not change the turmoil that goes on inside. And if you are a faith leader and you have someone in your community who has traumatic experiences in their past, never ever move them off the list because of the cheerful countenance they have and, the remarkable body of work that their life has put together or anything of the sort. Remember that it is always a lifelong journey.
So as I went over the ACEs earlier, we had a chance to look at that last week. I only had 3, which in retrospect seems like very few because I grew up with a bipolar father who was undiagnosed until he was in his 50s. That meant a lot of instability, not always having enough food in the home, changing schools every year because my father decided that he was going to take us off on an adventure, and not always having clothes that fit or that didn't have holes in them. So I grew up in that environment, which then propelled me as a parent to create structure so that I could cope, which then in turn, my children didn't always appreciate, especially my son. I watched for signs of mental illness in my children, and I didn't see any, which was sad because I found out after my son's suicide that he struggled. And his friends came forward and said, yes, I wanted to tell you that he had been talking about suicide, but I didn't know when the right time was. And I'm like, as soon as you hear it, that would be the right time. And so he struggled and I didn't know. What I did see in retrospect that he was more sensitive than my girls, which we sort of made a joke about. It's like, oh, the boy's supposed to be strong and all of this, and he's more sensitive. So I would just point out that a lot of times it's the ones that are more sensitive, more empathetic towards other people. These are the ones that are not only dealing with their own emotions, they're taking on the emotions of their friends and the environment and what's going on. So I would point that out. I talk about this now. This is not like something I thought, oh, I'm going to talk about suicide prevention because that's going to be so wonderful. When my father died by suicide almost 8 years ago, I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't say the word suicide. My best friends didn't know how he actually died. I could not physically talk about it. When my son died, I went into that dark hole where I had been with my father's death. And I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to hide. I wanted to say, if I stay in my home, I never have to deal with this again. And that's something I had to realize, that if I went into the dark hole, my husband and my other children who were struggling, they might not be there when I came out of my black hole. The other thing that helped me was that a couple of my friends called me and they expressed their concern for me and for their teenage children, because their children knew my son. If you're familiar with copycat suicide, it's a real thing. Their children were already struggling. One had even attempted the year prior. Would my son's death affect them? And that's when I really had to take a look at my life and say, I can't determine the outcome for these children, whether or not they end up taking their lives. But if I remain silent and I don't say anything, then I feel like some blame would come to me. And that's what propelled me down this, what I feel is a calling from God, to talk about suicide prevention. And it hasn't been easy. Every day I've been waking up and we're like, well, let's see who comes today. Because sometimes there's a lot of grief, and putting pants on is about the most that happens that day. And other times I'm out talking to people and I'm very adamant about what I'm saying and why we need to make changes in our society. And so just like Rabbi says, you don't know what's going to happen. The grief hits at different times. It was 2.5 years ago this week that my son took his life. I talk about it all the time. And through talking about it, it has helped me heal as best I can. I'm still healing. My husband and one of my daughters cannot talk about it. 2.5 years later, my husband goes to work because that's kind of his lifeline, keep him busy during the day. When we look at grief, we never know how someone is going to react. My husband was 35 years in the military. He cried like a baby for 3 days when my son died. I, on the other hand, couldn't cry for a week. I was angry. I was upset. I was in denial. It took me a week before I first cried. And so as faith leaders, as you're coming in to support the families, and I'm so excited to talk with you today about that, because I feel that you have a big reach in your communities. Don't judge someone by the externals of their grief. You don't know what's going on inside. You don't know what that person is feeling. When suicide happens, it's so much worse than any other kind of death, because the people around are saying, why did this happen? Why didn't I see this? Why didn't I know? Could I have done something different? And that's what's heartbreaking. And so I just plead to you that you understand how serious suicide is in our communities and know that you can make a difference. My hope in speaking out was that I could affect so that not one other parent would have to go through what my husband and I have been through. It has devastated our family. And no amount of accomplishment, of wealth, of prestige, it feels like nothing compared to the loss of our son. And I mourn that every day.
As I thought about how to share my story today, I thought it was very fitting that it happened to be on a Thursday, because my life changed on a Thursday 8 years ago, on August 1st, 2013. In 2 days, I was supposed to be married, and in 2 weeks, I was supposed to be going to law school. And I came home after running some of those last minute errands you have right before having a wedding, and couldn't find my little brother. He didn't greet me at the stairs like he normally did, and I figured he was at his friend's house, but I texted him, let him know I had some treats for him, coming out with me while we did random wedding stuff. And then a few hours later, my dad gets home and he's like, "Where is Chance? He has baseball practice soon. And I was like, oh, shoot, he's normally really on top of this. I'm not sure. I'll text him again." And the next thing I hear is a crash and screaming from upstairs. And I run upstairs, and my older brother came out of his room, and we're looking at each other and we're like, what is happening? Because dad has lost his mind. And we look over and he is just laying on the floor and screaming, and we can't get anything out of him. And so I go and I try to figure out what's going on, and I walk outside and I see that my younger brother has died and he has taken his own life. And I turned back to my older brother and I wanted so badly to tell him, don't go look. Chance is gone. We've got to get out of here. But I just froze, and then I ran out of the house. And for a lot of years, I had a lot of guilt over the fact that I couldn't save my older brother from seeing that. And that was one of those moments I didn't realize how much it hit me even until a few months ago, talking about it in therapy. Because for a long time, I thought if I could have saved Travis from seeing Chance, I could have saved his life. That was the thing that put him over the edge. That was the thing that 3 years later, that was the reason. But that wasn't the reason. There was so much more going on. And the reality is, if I told my older brother, don't go, don't look, he would have gone anyway. I couldn't have stopped him. There's nothing I really could have done in that moment to change things. So that week after Chance died, I went into what I call my checklist, like zombie mode, because there was so much to get ready for the funeral, and my parents couldn't handle it. My dad was the one who cried for days, and my mom was the one who was just numb to the world, and someone had to do this stuff. So I planned the funeral. I got all of it ready, and I remember after the funeral going to the luncheon and looking out at everyone and saying, I can't do this anymore. And I went home. I actually was living at my grandpa's house at the time because I couldn't live in that house anymore. And went into what I call my zombie phase for 3 months, where I barely got out of bed. My grandpa would make me go to the store with him just to get me out of the house. I refused to answer my best friends. I just couldn't exist, because how could I live without my little brother? He was my best friend. And I knew he was struggling, and I hadn't done enough to keep him here. And eventually my parents bought a new house and moved back in with them. Obviously, wedding did not happen. Law school did not happen. I lost my ability to drive. I lost my ability to read. I couldn't read a book and understand what I was reading. And eventually I was living at the new house with my parents, and I remember coming up the stairs and I said, Mom, I don't want to get out of bed anymore. I don't want to do this. I'm just done. And she said, okay, you don't have to get out of bed. You don't have to. You can go right back to bed, and everyone will understand. Everyone will say, of course, I couldn't get out of bed either if that was me. She said, or you can choose to get out of bed, and everyone will look at you and go, I don't know how she does it, because if it was me, I'd never get out of bed. And it was the first time that I really felt like I had permission to not be okay, to the point that I couldn't get out of bed. And after that, I have chosen to get out of bed every day. Sometimes I just go to the couch, but I get out of bed. Eventually, I decided to go to law school again. The school I was going to go to was amazing, worked with me, let me come right back. And so I started in the fall of 2015, and then decided to do a study abroad in Germany with the law school. And I was in Germany for about a week, when I got an email that said there's been a family emergency and you need to call home. And it took them about a day to get a hold of me just because of all of the communication problems. And when I finally got a hold of my mom, she said, you need to fly home right away because Travis took his life and we need you home. And suddenly I'm on the opposite side of the world with what felt like absolutely no one, trying to navigate foreign airports and train stations. And I'm just so lucky I had a roommate who got me as far as she could. And we had some amazing family friends who worked for an airline who helped coordinate it all and would call me and say, this is your next stop. And one of those family friends actually flew to Georgia, which was the first place I'd be in the United States, so that I could fly back to Salt Lake with someone else there. And I just remember seeing her face and finally thinking, I don't have to do this alone anymore. Someone else has me. And I think she literally had to hold me up as we walked through the airport. And since then, I describe it like a cup. When I lost Chance, picture a cup, however big you want. And when I lost Chance, my grief overflowed that cup for literally months. And it took years, about a year and a half, for it to stop overflowing to where I could exist without feeling my grief beyond measure. And what I've realized after losing my brother, and since then I've also lost 2 grandparents, not to suicide, just to health problems. But that cup doesn't ever go all the way down. That's not our lives anymore. That grief for me is always right there at the top. And it takes so very little to become overflowing again. And when I'm not overflowing, I can seem like I'm doing really good, but I could cry at the drop of a hat. I mean, I haven't made it a week without crying, and like Rabbi said, this isn't a, when are you healed? When did you know you were okay? It's been 8 years. It's been 5 years, and I still cry. I still struggle. So don't let people's personas convince you otherwise. Those struggles are still there. Check on them no matter how long that time has been.
Hello. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I am a survivor of sexual abuse by my father, but I did not tell a soul until I was an adult, until after I was married. And it was one of those things that just I tucked away in the back of my mind and just didn't really want to go there. And I've looked back on that time in my childhood with, and I feel like I have found a little bit of perspective in terms of why it takes victims or survivors so long to come forward. I feel like there are so many things in our lives that are not just coincidences, that are not just things that happen to come along the way. I wasn't ready to dig through my past and work through it until I was out of that home environment, until I felt comfortable and safe and protected in my own home with my husband. And I appreciate the fact that my brain worked in that way. It was a preservation for me. I think I was finally able to focus on that part of my life and dig through it, all the muck, and be able to figure out who I really was as an adult. I have unbelievable, I have so much respect for children who go through the process of being abused and disclosing and going through the case as a child. I know how difficult it was for me as an adult. And now to have the opportunity to work with the Children's Justice Center programs, I get to see all these Children's Justice Centers across the state. I get to see these incredible heroes who work with these children who are getting such wonderful services that I didn't have the opportunity until I was much, much older. A big part of my healing process along the way, I think, has been working through trust issues and realizing that I can find those relationships of trust again. I have incredibly supportive brothers and sisters who have stood by us, my sisters and myself, through a court case, through, a separation of family from my parents, and all the after effects that can sometimes come when there are issues of abuse. But one of the most important things for my process has always been my faith in God, my faith in the fact that sometimes rotten things happen to people, right? And I struggled for a long time with how could an innocent child live through such pain at the hands of somebody else and be left with a lifetime of aces to try to dig through. How is that possible from a loving God? And after years of trying to process this and trying to understand like how my faith can help me through this process, I finally felt a very strong answer from a loving God who let me know that sometimes bad things just happen because of consequences of evil individuals. We all have that agency to choose what we're going to do in our lives. And I unfortunately was a victim of that. But I was made to reflect upon all the instances in my life where there had been buffers to cushion that fall, whether it was faith leaders along the way, whether it was my music, which was a huge lifeline for me, whether it was, a beautiful sunset, whether all these wonderful things around us that testify to me that there's a God, whether it doesn't even matter whose God it is, whether it's Rabbi's beautiful God, my beautiful God, or all of them. There is a power that I can honestly tell you leads and helps us even when difficult things happen to us. I appreciate the fact that all of you are here today. I appreciate that we're talking about this. This topic of suicide has even more recently become part of my life as I lost my favorite cousin to suicide almost a year ago now, and trying to process the pain that you feel. I'm no stranger to pain, I feel like, over the years, but this is so different than any other pain I've ever experienced, losing somebody that you love. And I feel like it's just a process. You need people to reach out. You need people. They don't have to have the right thing to say, but they need to say something. I love you. I'm here for you. Something that lets you know that you're not alone. And I have felt those individuals over the course of my life, and they are those buffers that have helped carry me through. They are those manifestations to me that there is a God and that he uses us to help each other. And I appreciate the fact that we can share our experiences, that we can share, like Rabbi Zippel said, it's not like, check, I'm healed. I would love that. I don't know, where I sign up for that, but it's just every day, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. Some days you're feeling like, I'm good. And then it comes to the surface again, right? And that's okay. But our faith leaders are so incredibly important. 2 faith leaders stand out to me. As an adult, I disclosed very early on in the process to my local faith leader. And he showed such compassion, and he literally sat there protective of me and was frustrated and angry. To me, I needed that. I needed a father type figure to be like, this is not okay for you to be treated like this continually. And then I told another faith leader, and he sat there, pulled his chair next to mine, and all we did was sit there and sob together. That's the kind of effect that you can have without having the proper things to say that professionals would know how to say. That's their job. Your job is to be the support system when possibly nobody else will. So you are so important in every survivor of abuse story, in every family member of somebody who's passed by suicide. Your role cannot be discounted. And I hope you know that you can be that lifeline that we need.
They've shown such beautiful vulnerability and courage in sharing with us today. Thank you so much. Deandra, you gave a beautiful segue here into how we're going to switch gears next to talk about those things then in light of such difficult trauma. What were some of those counter or protective things? I love this imagery, in fact, that Deandra's faith leader came and was that protective figure, very literally, right, in word and in deed, and literally helped to create that buffer and start new pathways of trust for you. That's such a beautiful illustration. This idea that when we go through trauma, when we're experiencing hard things, that like you said, Rabbi, that it's not ever just done, and there is no one face of healing, and there's not a specific face for trauma either, right? So important to remember. So in that light, can we just go through again in your whatever order you want to take turns? What are some of those counter ACEs or those positive experiences that have helped you in your healing journey?
There was one really powerful point that I think that each of these incredible women touched on. Laura talked about getting texts from her close friends, and Sheila talked about her mom saying, it was okay not to get out of bed, and Deandra talked about her experience with her faith leader. I want to kind of echo that. For me, it was other faith leaders, colleagues, friends, and family who I would put it down to two specific details. Number one, similar to what my colleagues over here shared, let things happen at its own pace, and I love how Shayla, your mom, said, you don't have to get out of bed. If that's not where you're at, that's not where you're at. There's a lot of this kind of this inborn desire, how can I help? What can I do? Let's get you on your feet. Not interested in being on my feet today, but thank you for the kind offer, and really kind of allowing people who go through these sorts of experiences to heal at their own pace, to realize that at times the most supportive thing you can do is really give someone time and space to heal at their own pace, and to remind them that whatever pace they're taking is the correct pace, exactly their course of action, precisely how they've decided to go through this process. That is, exactly what they should be doing. Second of all, I love how we all talked about, talking about sexual abuse, talking about suicide, especially as a faith leader. I hate to make light of the situation, but I often tell this story. It was so illuminating for me because I come from a pretty insulated faith community, as I'm sure a lot of you understand. This past winter, there was a kosher restaurant up in Park City, and I went out for dinner with a friend who was visiting from out of town, and we're having dinner, and we're seated kind of against the wall of a restaurant. And so my back is to the rest of the restaurant, and there's two young women who are having dinner a couple tables over, and they look at my friend who I was having dinner with, and they say, "Excuse me, you look familiar. Are you related to such and such?" And they're all kind of, playing what we call Jewish geography. Oh yes, mutual friends, and I know this one, that one, sure. And so one of them says, "Well, if you're from out of town, what are you doing over here? What are you doing in Salt Lake City?" And so he says to me, he says, "Oh, I'm visiting a friend of mine. I'm here skiing with him." So I just turned around to these two and I said, "Hello, good evening." And one of them looks at me. She says, "Oh my goodness, I know who you are." I said, "Oh." She says, "Yeah, you're the guy with the you're the guy who, and God bless her friend is sitting across from her and says, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. He's the guy who how should I say this? And my friend tried to, kind of put everyone out of their misery. He says, yep, that's him. Y'all have a great evening. And we all went back to our dinner. And so, for me, so much of the healing process, especially from a faith leader's perspective, is about learning and finding language. I am not something. I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. Now, I ran from that title for a number of years, like Deandra, because I wasn't comfortable with that label. And whenever I meet another faith leader who hems and haws and X and becks and tries to say every word in the English language aside for those words, that only really re-intensifies that shame, because I wasn't comfortable with those words, so I took great steps to escape them. And anytime I meet someone who is just can't get, I get it. It's a lot to get out of your mouth. It's a lot to swallow. These are not words that are part of our lexicon. We all feel uncomfortable saying so-and-so is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. However uncomfortable you might be with saying that, that doesn't change the reality. That doesn't change the narrative. I am still a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, comfortable or uncomfortable as you may be saying that. And so I think as we talk about this issue with faith leaders, whether it's learning the right verbiage around suicide, when we had a call a couple of weeks ago, and Deandra and I asked, Lark and Shayla, how can we most respectfully talk about this issue? What are the words we should use? What are the words we shouldn't use when it comes to childhood sexual abuse? How can you talk about that issue if we want to create a safe and welcoming environment for people who have been through these adverse childhood experiences? I think the best thing and the most welcoming thing we can do is, on a very basic level, just learn how to talk about it.
After my son died, something happened that day. I had been away. I left early that morning to do some business training that I was doing. And my husband was the one who found our son. He had shot himself in his bedroom. He'd taken steps, thinking, I don't want to disturb mom and dad, so I'm going to muffle the sound so we didn't hear a gunshot. My husband found him. And after calling the police, he called a person in our neighborhood that he loved and trusted. And we're LDS, and so it was the Relief Society president that he called. So put that in whatever context you need to do for your faith. But he didn't call her because she was the Relief Society president. He called her because she was a friend. Know the people in your congregation. Allow them to be in a place where they can trust you when they have a difficulty. She came over and helped him navigate the police, the fire department, the ME. She stayed the whole day. My husband kindly sent the police officer to tell me what was going on at my conference. That was awesome. And so I came home and came into that environment. That was important to us, to have a friend who stood by us that day and did things for us that would have been very difficult for us to do. Then our bishop came over, and the stake president came over, and being fairly independent and quiet, we're like, we don't bring us any meals. Nobody come over here. We're just shutting down the doors. We're closing it up. We're going to take care of ourselves. And they're like, no, really, we want to help. And they're like, nope. We're doing it on our own. That lasted about 12 hours. Thank goodness, like cooler heads prevailed. They said, people want to help you. Let us bring in meals at least, which took a burden off us. We didn't want to think about food. My husband stopped eating. He lost 15 pounds in 1 week. I had to force him to eat a small little muffin. We were barely hanging on. Now, our family needed some insulation. We didn't want a lot of people coming by. We couldn't deal with that. We couldn't deal with, hey, let's talk about it. Let's put on a happy face. We couldn't deal with it. I know another family whose son died by suicide, and that evening they're having an open house saying, yes, we need your love. We need your help. So like Rabbi said, allow them to heal and to go through whatever they're doing. Don't try to push them and force them to recover and get through these steps of grief. It doesn't work like that. If it were up to my husband and one of my daughters, I would shut up about talking about suicide prevention. Mom, could you just like shut up about this? I cannot. But just like I have to talk about it for my healing, I have to allow them their healing and not talking about it. I have to respect them in that. We had some very good friends. This man is very outgoing, and he tried to get us several months after our son died to come out and do activities. Come to this activity, come to that. This will be so much fun and all of this. And after 3 very intense invitations by him, I finally had to say, we cannot do this. This is not where we're at. We appreciate your love and concern, but we're pretty much just staying home. We had a year of COVID lockdown the year before COVID lockdown. I mean, we were just at home. We didn't want to go out. Occasionally I try to go to a comedy show. It's not funny. All right. Like nothing is funny anymore. The grief and the hurt that we have is just no getting over that. And so we just try to go on day by day, supporting each other. And I have to say that, so you're aware of this, first of all, when a suicide happens in a family, there's an increased percentage of 50% for another suicide to happen, which I didn't know about. I would have been more attentive, talked to my children more about that. And so I could see that within my own family, my daughters, my husband. We're military family. I joke that my husband never saw a gun he didn't have to own. And fortunately, he had the presence of mind that we changed the combination on the gun safe so that I was the only one who knew. He understood his mental health, that he was not in a good place for that. This is important to know. So if you're going into a home, don't assume that things need to stay the way they were. And we're just navigating day by day. Marriages that go through a death of a child in any way increase 35% or more the chances of divorce. You think marriage is tough? Try going through it when you have lost a child. Because everything is magnified. All the problems are magnified. And irrational blame comes out. And something that I learned very early on was that in order for our family and our marriage to survive, we have got to take blame off the table. I cannot blame my husband for XYZ. He cannot blame me for whatever he perceives I did wrong as a parent or whatever. Take it off the table. We want to find some justification by blaming, oh, that's the reason why. We're going to assign retribution to that person for what they did. You won't survive. You won't make it. Take it off the table. The other thing I would like to say, before my son died, I parented with tough love. Now, I just parent with love. Love your children. Love those in your congregation. Remove the desire to judge. Allow grace. And don't assume that you know everything and can pigeonhole them in a certain area. And I just want to mention this, please do not tell someone that the person who has died by suicide is going to hell. That does not help. Suicide comes about because they are not in their rational mind. God has given us each a desire to live. And if we have overcome that natural desire to live, we are not in our right minds. It's just like cancer or diabetes. They are not in their right minds. Give them some grace and acknowledge that you don't have all the answers. Let God work it out. Because I think more than anything I've learned, there's a lot of grace.
I just want to piggyback off of that, of things to say and not say. I know we're off topic a little bit, but don't say they're in a better place. Their best place is right here with me. Okay. Don't say everything happens for a reason, because it doesn't feel very good to hear your brother had to die for a reason. I know that those things are coming from a good place, but just as much as you can, please just take those off the table, because they hurt more than they help. And even well intentions can hurt. I wanted to talk about a kind of combo experience I had with 2 faith leaders who, one was our current bishop when my little brother Chance died, and one was the bishop right before that. And when Chance died, the police asked me when they got there, who can we call for you? You know, who, like, what can we do? And I said, call former Bishop Larson. He's the man. And I think he ended up getting off work early just to come home for us. His wife came and picked us up from our house because clearly we were not in a state to drive, and we could not handle being at that house while police and fire trucks and medical were there. It just wasn't an option. So they took us back to their house, and we were at their house till like 10 p.m. and it was, every neighbor was over, every family member was over. I mean, they just welcomed us with open arms, and there were suddenly sandwiches and fruit and little things people could try to eat. And I mean, they couldn't fix it, but they took away us having to try to figure out the next steps. And we needed that so badly at that moment. In contrast, our current bishop at the time, I remember, you know, the next day or two, we were trying to plan the funeral and who's going to talk and who's going to have the musical numbers and all of that stuff. And you're just reeling as it is. So it's so hard to think about, why do I have to write an obituary for my 14-year-old brother? Why do I have to talk at this? Like, you know, it's hard enough. And this particular bishop just kept saying things like, well, you know, it's getting really too long. It can only be an hour. You know, you have way too many musical numbers. You have too many speakers. Your messages don't seem like they're focused on Christ enough. I mean, it was just, he took the handbook or whatever it was, and it was just bullet point down the list. You can't do this, you can't do that. And we were not doing well anyway. And then on top of it, it felt like we couldn't give my brother the memorial that he deserved and the goodbye we needed to give to him. And so many people wanted to be a part of his funeral. And so we were trying to balance all of these things. And luckily, one of our friends, her brother-in-law was the stake president. So a step higher for if you're not LDS. And he was in the stake presidency, and she told him about what was going on. And he said, oh, no. We are not doing that to this family. Tell that bishop to stop, and you tell that family they contact me with all of the funeral arrangements from now on. I don't care if the funeral's 4 hours long. If that's what they need, we will sit, we will deal, you know? And so we were just so grateful that someone else stepped in and said, you know what, we don't need to focus on these bullet points. We don't need to add extra hurt. Don't pour salt into their wounds. If this is what they need to heal, let them. So I would just encourage you to not get stuck in a checklist or a to-do list or the boxes of how things should be. If it doesn't hurt and it can help the family, it's okay. Let it happen.
Just real quickly, I know our time is up, but just a few lasting impressions. Just lead with your heart. Like, don't overthink it. Don't worry if the words are going to come out. They will. I look back on these really difficult points over the course of my life. I don't remember exactly what people said, but I do remember that they were there. I remember the people who very quietly left cookies on my doorstep after my siblings and I came forward and it hit the media about the abuse from my childhood. I remember feeling sequestered in my home because I couldn't leave and go anywhere without everybody knowing this stuff. But I specifically remember those people who reached out. And I've had people since approach me and say, I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. And then they apologize, realizing after the fact how that appears. So as a faith leader, challenge not just yourselves, but challenge those within your congregations to be the eyes and ears. You can't be everywhere. You can't be expected to be the professionals. You can't be expected to be the ones that are, trained to be able to go and help families through this stuff. Don't be afraid yourselves to reach out for help. Don't be afraid to make those connections to the individuals who can help the mental health needs of those in your congregation. It's a hefty burden on each of you. And please know that I see that. I feel that. I notice all the many wonderful things that you're doing and how heavy that burden must feel so many days. Share the load. Reach out to people you know can help within your congregations, within your circles, and let them take part of that load from you. And the effects are powerful on those that you're helping. We feel it and we will remember it, I promise you.
We have another round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you. As we close this panel, I hope that you all are taking at least mental note. Hopefully you've written some things down. I think all of our panelists have shared such powerful ideas, things that we can be aware of to check our assumptions, check our language, be a friend, allow for timing, do those crucial things that are so important to build compassion. Something I've been thinking about as you all were talking about is this idea of crucibles that we have in our life. A crucible is a situation that is intense that creates change. All of you have shared with us today some crucibles of adversity. But sometimes we can have great impacts of hope and of healing too, that can be very impactful. So I appreciate the beautiful contrast, the vulnerability, and again, for all of your time and attention. Thank you one more time.